Hello, I'm Adrian Finnegan. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, find out how the Middle East oil industry is changing here in the Gulf. What will OPEC's production cut extension mean for energy jobs in the region? Also this week, why our obsession with photographing our food with our phones is altering the way the restaurant industry looks at itself. Plus, China and Hong Kong get a credit rating cut, and they're not happy about it. 9 more months. OPEC countries and 11 other oil-producing nations have extended oil production cuts until March next year. They're trying to drain the global oversupply of oil and prop up the price of crude. Saudi Arabia led the push to extend the curbs, but oil prices have risen less than OPEC countries had hoped for. And that's because oil at current prices is enough to bring US producers back into the market, as Gabe Elizondo reports.
In western Texas, in one of the busiest oil fields in the U.S., oil sitting at about $50 a barrel means there's now no shortage of activity, thanks in large part to fracking. That's the process of drilling down into the ground while using high-pressure water to force the gas out. This is the epicenter for the U.S. shale oil and gas industry, and for this sector, fracking is not only good for business, but also good for America.
Up until a few years ago or so, I think OPEC controlled our destiny. For the United States to be energy independent, I think is critical, and I think it's important.
Since its founding more than 50 years ago, OPEC has accounted for about 40% of the world's oil production and attempted to maintain a tight grip on prices. But today, OPEC is not the power that it once was, and fracking here in America is partly to blame. At the New York Mercantile Exchange, where commodity futures are traded, there was only a modest price increase after the announcement by Saudi Arabia and non-OPEC member Russia, the world's top 2 oil producers, that they agreed that there was a need to further control output to increase prices. American fracking operators are increasingly having influence in the global market.
You'll see an uptick in the price, but I don't see it being sustained. There is no shortage of oil anywhere, especially not here. We still have plenty of oil, and there's more coming out of the ground every day. And the frackers here, they are not going to, they're not looking to limit their production because Russia and Saudi Arabia says to. They're not going to, work with OPEC at all. Why would they?
And with more fracking sites in the U.S. being tapped, OPEC's economic influence over this country and the global market recedes yet further.
Well, joining us now, Kian Brennan, Sector Lead of Natural Resources Qatar at Turner and Townsend. Welcome to Counting the Cost, Kian. The price of oil has stayed stubbornly around the $50 mark, despite this cut in production. It's not risen as OPEC had hoped. What damage has that done to the oil industry, particularly in the Middle East?
Well, it's important to look at a long-term view of the market. And when you look at the 3 major importers of oil, all of them have increased their level of imports of crude oil and petroleum products. And you can combine that with the lack of investment that has taken place since late 2014 and that is required to sustain production. It could be said that towards the latter half of this decade, there could actually be a supply shortage.
Okay, so the price would naturally rise if there was a supply shortage, but that seems a long time to wait when that investment needs to go in now. Can the oil industry afford to make the investment, which is absolutely necessary?
Well, for the most part, it needs to. So if you look at how an oil field works, it's important to know that not only to increase supply, to handle that increase in demand, you need to develop oil fields, you need to have new wells, you need to do workovers on existing wells, and that is just to maintain supply. So absolutely, if you look at Aramco, you can see that the deals that were put in place over the last few weeks point to their ambition to invest heavily in the next few years.
I want to talk to you about Aramco some more in just a moment, but first of all, let's just talk about the damage that this relatively low oil price has done to the industry. Living and working in the Middle East, we all know people who've lost their jobs. Contracts have been ended. A lot of people who worked in the oil industry aren't here anymore. Are the days of peak oil gone? Will the oil industry ever employ as many people as it used to do before this sustained price tumble?
I think the industry is changing. Okay, for certain, there's a greater emphasis on cost management. Pre-FID estimates, making sure that costs are managed over the course of the life cycle of a project. But I do see the investment upping over the next number of years to support that. I think the value of oil is what is more important. Maybe the dollar value may not hit over $100 a barrel again, but the value of oil will definitely increase in the medium term.
Okay. And you talk about the investment that Aramco in particular is putting in. Of course, we've got the IPO coming up as well. Tell us a little more about that investment that the company is making.
Well, so obviously, the IPO is coming up in 2018, but there is a number of agreements that Aramco have made that are signifying their intent to invest heavily. And that was, Trump came into Saudi Arabia as well documented. But agreements, if you look at the specific agreements that were put in place, there was agreements with Weatherford, Halliburton, Schlumberger, and these are the main drilling companies. As memorandums of understanding were signed with these companies. There was MOUs signed with drilling companies, rig companies such as NOV and other companies similar to that. There's also Jacobs and McDermott Engineering. All of these MOUs that have been signed is Aramco and indeed Saudi Arabia's intention to invest heavily to meet this increase in demand.
And that suggests confidence that the price of oil will rise over the long term?
Absolutely.
Okay. So we've got this 9-month extension to the cut in production. Donald Trump has said that he wants to sell off US oil inventories. What damage could that do to OPEC's plans with this production cut? The whole point being to raise the price of oil. So,
as I said previously, the demand for the US in particular, if you look at how much oil they've imported since 2006 to 2014, it was declining. But since the oil price has actually come down, in 2015 it's risen by 2.2%, in 2016 it's risen by 7%. That trajectory is heading up as well. And this is also at the same time concurrently to the shale revolution in the States. So if the demand is able for it, I'm not necessarily sure there will be an issue.
So even if Congress allowed Donald Trump to sell off those reserves, he would have very little impact?
I think so.
Okay. Cian, it's been great to talk to you on Counting the Cost. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Now, you may not know it, but Spain is known as the Saudi Arabia of olive oil. It's the world's biggest producer of the commodity. Spanish production is forecast to fall by 7% this year, and crops of olives in Italy, Tunisia and Greece are also down. Overall, world production is forecast to fall 14% in 2017 due to bad weather in the Mediterranean. That's according to the International Olive Council. As a result, the retail price of extra virgin olive oil, the price you pay in the supermarket, is forecast to rise. Now, taking photos of what you eat and posting them to forums like Instagram is a global social phenomenon that seems to be growing. Cloud eggs, unicorn frappuccinos and avocado toast all have one thing in common: social media made them a hit. When it comes to food these days, the camera really does eat first. 208 million posts have been hashtagged food on the photo sharing app since it was founded in 2010. And restaurants, food growers and the retail market are paying attention. That's because making your product more appealing for sharing on social media makes business sense. When a trend catches on, it can have a big impact. Avocado prices are at their highest in data going back 19 years. Shares of Starbucks are near all-time highs too. And it's said the unicorn frappuccino coffee trend is a factor in that. All right, joining us now from London, Fern Potter, who's global digital partner at Carrot. Carrot's a network that provides digital and diversified media solutions. Welcome to Counting the Cost, Fern. What are we to make of the fact then that social media has this ability to move prices, to move markets, the prices of staple goods, commodities that we all use on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, social media has really exploded onto the scene in recent years, and I think we have to look first at how people are looking at trust and their values. So they've moved from trust in kind of state and government into trust in advertising, and then through into trust in each other. So the way of sharing and socializing media, sharing values, and this has enabled businesses to really dig into the data and dig into how people are working with brands and how they consume brands to monitor their supply and demand. And therefore, it's really an integral part of looking at the full supply chain of how they ensure that the food and commodities production is linked to actually what people want and their personal desires. Does
this mean then that companies are having to figure in social media right from the start of the supply chain now? They're going to have to work out how products are going to be marketed and how people are going to share images in particular of day-to-day staples?
Absolutely. I think there's a definite need for companies and businesses to look into that data, to look at trends and targeting of how they can reach consumers and reach audiences in real time like never before. It can also inform new product development, the desires and wants of each of the consumers and how they're talking and sharing photos and food and interacting with that presence online. It's created a bit of a globalization. There's a want to for validation of people's choices, but also how people experience can be widened, and there's a breadth there. So companies really need to dig into that information to be able to inform their business choices and to be able to meet the supply and demand of the consumer. I think there's a definite interest. We've seen Pop Sugar in the US, we've seen Amazon Prime come up, that there needs to be a link to e-commerce to enable people that are looking and searching online and using social media to go direct from the products that they enjoy, they like, and that they see in social media to purchase. And there's an immediacy which is predominant in our generation and with millennials.
Personally, I can't think of anything worse than looking at pictures of other people's food, but it's remarkably popular online, isn't it? And on Instagram, it is. There's a lot of people doing it. To what extent is that driving the restaurant business as well? In that restaurants now are not just thinking about the way that their food tastes, but they've got to think of the way the food looks, how it's served, the crockery that it's on, the way the table is laid out, the decor of the restaurant, because of course it's now become a visual experience as well as a tasting experience.
It's so true. I've seen recently in London a restaurant opening that's kind of Instagram ready, so you don't require filters, etc. And it is a new phenomenon. But people like to share. People want social. They want validation through their friends. They want to experience other things that people haven't. And there's this whole culture of reviewing and being able to access something you wouldn't necessarily have done so before. It is an ongoing trend, but I think that it's just the nature of how our society works at the moment. This social media provides a platform to have those conversations and in a time-poor generation as well. So essentially it's facilitating a conversation that we would have previously had around the dinner table.
Really is fascinating. Fern, really good to talk to you. Many thanks indeed for being with us today on Counting the Cost.
Thank you very much.
Still to come on Counting the Cost, Ford, the company that produced the world's first mass-market car, gets a new tech CEO as it changes gear for the driverless car era. But first, we're turning our attention to growth dynamics in Asia. Japan's been getting a lot of positive press lately. The IMF said in April that the economy's been performing well. Then in May, quarterly GDP was up 2.2%. Welcome news indeed, as that marked the country's longest economic expansion in 11 years. Helped by government stimulus. Meanwhile, financial chiefs in Hong Kong and China issued statements saying that they disagreed with credit rating agency Moody's. Moody's cut China's debt to A1 from AA3, saying that it won't be able to control a credit boom. Moody's also downgraded Hong Kong's debt to AA2 from AA1 because of its close ties to the mainland. Both governments issued statements saying that Moody's was wrong. Well, joining us now from Hong Kong is Jeff Lewis. Jeff is the Senior Asia Strategist with Manulife Asset Management. Jeff, good to have you with us on Counting the Cost. First it was China this week, now Hong Kong. So what's your take on all of this?
Well, I think a lot of us were surprised at the downgrade of Hong Kong because Hong Kong basically doesn't really have much government debt, about 1.5% of GDP. It also has huge fiscal reserves, around 35% of GDP. So yes, Hong Kong would suffer if China had a hard landing, because the two economies are very closely interlinked. But there's a huge fiscal buffer here, and it's been a very well managed economy. So and the links with China have long been obvious. So the timing is a bit of a surprise.
Yeah, Moody's says that it downgraded Hong Kong because of Hong Kong's exposure and the fact that Hong Kong's economy is so closely related to China's. It says that credit trends in China are going to continue to affect Hong Kong, given their close economic, financial and political ties. I mean, is Hong Kong here suffering collateral damage?
I don't think it's going to suffer collateral damage, no. China clearly has some credit problems, but Hong Kong, as I've just said, has very little government debt. It has a very strong fiscal balance. It has conservative policies. So yes, there'd be a drop in tourism. Yes, there'd be a drop in trade. So the Hong Kong economy would suffer somewhat, but I think it would be able to weather that in most circumstances, unless you really have a very hard landing in China. So the linkages between the economy, the financial sectors, have been there for a long time. So why downgrade now?
All right, let's talk about Moody's downgrading of China there. Just a notch, but it's significant. The first time in 30 years. What do you make of that?
Well, I'd like to think that this could be an incentive for the reform-minded camp in Beijing to continue with their policies of cleaning up the financial sector, particularly shadow banking. So in one sense, Moody's might have done them a favor. The markets weren't too fazed by it. I think it was long expected because it's been on negative watch since, I think, March 2016. So from that point of view, it's Moody's telling China, I think, enough is enough. You have to look to the excessive credit creation that's going on. You have to get this under better control.
Jeff, I want to talk to you about Japan. 2.2% growth in the first 3 months of this year. At last, it seems, Abenomics are actually working.
Well, I think 1 quarter is too short a period to say that Japan's growth is going to stay at 2%. I think what they've managed to do by increasing working hours, by increasing female participation, they've managed to offset some of the negative impact of a decline in labor force. 2% is good going for an economy where most people think that the productive potential rate is 1% or slightly less.
And what about the aging population in Japan? I mean, Japan's got some problems that its competitors regionally don't have, doesn't it?
Japan is facing yet another fiscal cliff in terms of demographics. So that is a structural problem, which means that the country is not going to show vigorous growth in the coming decades. In a relative sense, some other countries are also now aging rapidly, so Japan might have almost a first mover advantage, perhaps.
And Jeff, given the fundamentals, which of those three economies should we be paying closest attention to? China, Hong Kong, or Japan?
Well, I would say definitely China. China is now the world's #2 economy. China matters to all investors, whether you're investing there directly or not. China has had a huge effect on the region with its improvement and stabilization in growth. For example, Asian exports in total in the first quarter were up about 15%, but exports to China were up 28%. So that shows you that China is the biggest growth driver for the region, and it's also a major influence on the global economy, and is still contributing about a third, I think, to GDP growth for the world economy. So it's something now which is too big to ignore.
Jeff, great to talk to you on Counting the Cost. Thanks for being with us this week.
Thank you.
Now, the American car giant Ford has replaced its chief executive. Mark Fields seems to have taken the hit for the auto firm's falling profits and huge decline in its share price. He's being replaced by the company's self-driving cars chief. Alan Fisher reports.
It's an iconic name in the global motor industry, but Ford has had real problems over the last 2 years. In 2016, it sold 6.65 million vehicles worldwide. It sounds impressive until you realise rival General Motors sold almost 10 million. That gap was reflected in a sharp drop in the share price, down almost 40% since Mark Fields became chief executive in 2014.
Ford family, the directors were less than enthralled about the direction that Ford shares have been going, probably less than enthralled about the direction of the company too. But I think if the share price had been stronger, we might see Mark Fields still with us.
Ford has fallen behind rivals like Toyota and Volkswagen in developing new electric vehicles and self-driving cars. Last month, Ford's stock market value fell behind Tesla, the electric car company, which has never made a profit. Some observers regarded that as a hugely symbolic moment in Ford's struggles. The new guy in charge is Jim Hackett, who joined Ford last year and is in charge of its autonomous driving division.
The fitness of the business is always an objective, the improved fitness, I should say. It never can relax because the world's always moving. My old football coach used to say you either get better or worse, you don't stay the same. And so many of the things you're hearing that Ford's been contemplating are in support of that.
Just last week, the company announced it was cutting 1,400 jobs in North America and the Asia Pacific. It's hoping people will take redundancy packages and mainly will involve non-factory workers where the cars are made. But there may be more job cuts on the way. Hackett is known as a cost cutter. The company's share price rose on the announcement of the change at the top.
Finally this week, some fishermen in Somalia say that they're being pushed towards piracy because illegal fishing is hurting their livelihood. They say that flotillas from countries like Yemen, Iran and South Korea are plundering Somalia's rich fishing grounds. Mohammed Addo reports.
Business at the fish market in northeast Somalia's port city of Bosaso is brisk. It's that time of the day when fishermen return from sea with their catch. This may look like plenty of fish, but the fishermen swear they've seen better days. They say their seas have been exploited by foreign fishing boats, and the economic infrastructure that once provided them lucrative jobs has been ravaged.
Fishing is not as profitable as it used to be. We rarely make any good catch these days. We have to go long distances, and illegal fishing boats often destroy our nets.
With no meaningful authority to police its seas, illegal and unregulated fishing in Somalia is now a free-for-all. Development agencies say the prevalence of illegal fishing and lack of economic opportunities are pushing more Somalis to turn to piracy, partly as a form of protest and partly because they see no other options. Somali law prohibits foreign fishing vessels from fishing within 25 kilometers of the coast. This to protect small-scale fishes. Also banned are destructive fishing methods such as bottom trawling, a practice where ships drag a fishing net across the seafloor, catching everything in its path. Somali fishermen accuse the country's weak authorities of failing to implement the law and helping some of the foreign fishing trawlers.
Both federal and regional governments are giving licenses to foreigners to fish in our waters. That would not be a problem if they supervise the foreigners' fishing habits, but they don't. The foreigners don't pay taxes, but just bribe officials.
It's a claim the administration in the semi-autonomous region of Puntland vehemently denies.
We've declared illegal fishing a national disaster. Our forces are working around the clock to stop it. It's Asian trawlers and fishing boats from neighboring countries such as Yemen that are causing the most damage.
At 3,333 kilometers, Somalia's coastline is the longest on mainland Africa. It will be a while before the fledgling Somali government can adequately police it. Yet tackling foreign fishing vessels plying the waters off Somalia's coast, pestering Somali fishermen and possibly turning some toward violence remains an urgent matter.
And that is our show for this week. If you'd like to get in touch with us, if there's anything you want to comment on, please do. You can tweet me. I'm at @afinnegan. Please use the hashtag AJCTC when you do, or drop us a line. Counting the Cost at aljazeera.net is our address. And don't forget, there's plenty more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our webpage, which has individual links, reports, even entire episodes for you to catch up on. But that's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Adrian Finnegan from the whole team here in Doha. Thanks for being with us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.